Welcome back to bringing Jesus back into focus. Oh, wait a minute, where have I gone? There I am. Now, bringing him back into focus, you say? Is he blurry? He is blurred. He's blurred because the corrupt Christian leaders who were pacifists in the 4th century under Emperor Constantine converted all Christians who were worshipping and following Jesus towards this loving spiritual dimension and world, otherworldly, where the spiritual bodies would leave their physical body behind and enter the spiritual world that Jesus spoke about, which is only love, and the life force and dimension and consciousness and mind of that being, you might say, who created that world, is only love. What they did was, under Constantine, once he freed them up from persecution, they went, "Thanks, Constantine, what can we do for you?" And it ended up, the answer was, all my Roman soldiers who are Christians need to still be allowed to go and kill and murder. And so they caved in. They destroyed the spiritual teaching of pacifism that Jesus and Buddha taught, but they destroyed the Jesus teaching of pacifism. And they turned all Christians back into worshipping the two-headed God of the Jews. Please understand, the Jewish religion is not monotheistic. I think that's the longest running lie in history that I know of. It's got one body, monobod, Yahweh on the body. 2 heads. One's a war god, one's a god of love and peace. The Romans had a war god, god of love and peace. War god, love and peace for the Greeks and the Egyptians. The Roman war god was Mars, brutal, violent killer. Ares, the Greek god, brutal, violent killer. Sekhmet, the Egyptian war god, brutal, violent killer. They all had their own specific temple and name. And the Jews had a war god, a violent, brutal killer called Yahweh. But we've got to say Yahweh one, because the Jews are cunning, deceptive, deceiving. The Romans, the Greeks and the Egyptians are honest. They had another god for love and peace. The Greeks had Eugene, I think it is. No, Irene, sorry, Irene. And the Romans had Pax. And the Egyptians had another god whose name I can't recall, but it was a god that had mellowed you out, it calmed you down. It was a calming god, as opposed to the violent, brutal Sekhmet, breathing fire and killing, like Yahweh, etc. So they all were worshipping the exact same war god. The Jews were worshipping Mars, Ares and Sekhmet. That's who they were worshipping. And the Romans were worshipping Yahweh one, as were the Greeks. They're all war gods. They're all the same. Death, murder, stealing, genocide, violence. The same. The Jews had a god of love too, like Pax, Irene, etc. But they called that Yahweh. They already had a Yahweh god, a violent, murdering, stinking killer. But they came up with a cunning idea. Let's make them as if they're one, the same God. Put them under the same roof in one temple, not two. They should be separated in 2 different temples. They're different gods. The Jews thought cunningly, we'll just join them together. That'll get rid of our conscience. We can kill and murder and slaughter and then love one another, because the same God tells us to do both. What a lie. What a disgraceful lie. I hope some rabbis break away from that Jewish dialogue and begin a new Jewish faith. Rip out all the references to your war god at Jericho and Nineveh and anywhere else where this slaughtering, murdering Mars, Ares, Sekhmet, that's right, that's who you're worshipping, a war god. And stay with the Yahweh of love, right? It's there too. Love your neighbour as yourself. If a foreigner is amongst you, treat them as a Jew and love them like a Jew. That's in Leviticus. That's the loving God. You see, that's Pax. That's Irene. That's the loving God. It's a different God. The trouble for Christians, the corrupt Christians in the 4th century, laid all that and dumped it all onto Jesus. He becomes the son of Yahweh, which means he's the son of the war god, the stinking war god of Mars, Ares, Yahweh one, Sekhmet. They're all war gods. So what they did is they poisoned who Jesus was, poisoned who the loving spiritual creator is by saying this poisoned Yahweh, violent Yahweh, is the same God in the Gospels of Jesus. The one whose love rises on the good and the evil, the one whose rain falls on the just and the unjust, the one who's kind to the ungrateful and the evil. That's not the war god Yahweh, is it? You see, they've poisoned the Jewish religion. I mean, the Jewish religion poisoned the Christian religion. If only we could clean them both up. They took the Jewish religion and poisoned the Christian religion. That's what they did. So I'm here to undo that. I'm here to stand up for Jesus and the loving spiritual creator who I only love. When I left the Jewish Christian Catholic Church when I was 16, I took Jesus with me in his words of love and non-violence. I studied Buddhist teaching because he was a pacifist like Jesus originally was and like I am. I'm one of the early Christians still left in the world. Not many of us left now. So I had to write about this and try to help Jewish Christians discuss this, talk about it in your church, cut the Bible in two, get rid of the Jewish religion, stick it on the shelf. Don't study it. Rip out the book of Revelation and burn it. That's just pure slander. That's the book of Daniel from the Old Testament, and someone's dumped Jesus and the beautiful loving creator in the middle of it. Jesus is going to cause famines and wars and starvation. I mean, it's just ridiculous. So I wrote a new translation of the Gospels of Jesus Unplugged, and that's published around the world, and you'll find that's a much better translation of the Greek interlinear Gospels. I don't use the term God the Father, I use the term loving spiritual creator, which is more accurate. The teachings of Jesus Unplugged, and I also removed all the Jewish apocalyptic poisoned overlays that have been put onto him in the Gospels. They shouldn't be there. He wasn't an apocalyptic Jew, that's a lie. The teachings of Jesus Unplugged exposes the truth about the Jewish religion and how it's poisoned the Christian religion, and how Jesus' teachings are all about this inner transformation that you and I have to undergo to become like him and then enter the spiritual world after our body of flesh dies. He's not coming back on the clouds, sorry. He said, follow me to where I've gone. That's what he said. So we've got these two books that are available. This is the book of the teachings about to be released in the first 2 weeks of 2026 in January, the new year, a new book, a new year, a new way of thinking of Jesus. It's an old way, actually. It's the original way. The spiritual teachings of Jesus are a universal calling to all human children on earth to awaken into our spiritual body and true identity of love and non-violence before our dualistic body and mind of the flesh dies and returns to the earth. Only our spiritual body and soul live on. That's what Jesus taught. We must prevent the dualistic mind of our earthly body of flesh from controlling us and become at one with our spiritual mind, filled only with the loving life force of our loving spiritual creator. Then our two bodies, one made of the earth and one formed of spirit, can be in harmony and at one in purpose to bring the spiritual love and peace of heaven to earth for all children. Only true spiritual children of light and love can enter the heavenly spiritual world. That's the truth. All those children divided within themselves between love and hatred cannot enter. The words of Jesus can awaken and transform us. We have two bodies. Jesus taught that. It's in one of the other chapters. I'll be talking about a very important chapter in this episode about Jesus rising from the tomb, yes or no. This is the daily prayer that can center you into your spiritual body. If you sit calmly somewhere, if you look back at my email there on the earlier bit of this video, email me and I'll send you a PDF of this. And if you want to use he to represent this divine loving spiritual being of Jesus, I'll send one with the word he. I use the word she as to represent this divine spiritual being because women give birth on earth, and our spiritual bodies sort of come out of some sort of birthing process from some spiritual dimension or life force. So why not call her she? And also women tend not to start wars in this world. It's normally the rock-ate males. Rock-ate males who do that. You know, the Vladimir Putins and all those Hitlers and Netanyahu's, Hamas, all these sort of rock-apes. So women certainly are the more intelligent spiritual species on earth, that's for sure. You can't deny that. So this is a daily prayer. Find a quiet place, and this is the prayer that if you learn it, you can say it off by heart. It's sort of semi-rhymes, so it's easy to eventually learn off by heart. I say this every day, and I try to picture myself in my spiritual body, think of myself being just a spiritual child of heaven on earth. My mind has to therefore be only full of love, and that's what I do, to try to become that child before my body of flesh dies. As I rest upon this earth, the Holy One, she will give birth to who I really am, awakening me from clay and sand, a spiritual child of the divine, with only her love that fills my mind. To every creature I will be kind in every single land, for this is truly who I am. a spiritual child of the loving spiritual Creator in the heavenly spiritual world, born out of the earth, to bring her love to children in need and help guide them home to heaven as she has guided me, through the spiritual way and teachings that Jesus gave us to be, just as he, a spiritual child of love on earth. The logo at the bottom, the Spirit Earth logo, is a cross and a dove in a circle, surrounded by one circle. That represents the two bodies in your own body and in Jesus' body. His body of flesh on the cross died, was buried, and that's it. It didn't rise. He left in the dove, the spiritual body that he had with him, which he was teaching the disciples and everyone about all the time, and he even demonstrated with his death on the cross. And this is what I'm about to explain to you. Now, I've had to do this in the best way I can, because of course we've got limited information, and there has been cover-ups and red herrings put in the Gospels to cover up what really happened when he died. You've got to remember the Jews were not ready at all. The disciples had a really hard time understanding what he was saying, because they were coming out of a dualistic, two-headed God religion, violent and sometimes loving. They didn't understand about the oneness of love at all, or that we had two bodies, one spiritual, one's flesh. So Jesus had to teach them this, and eventually he demonstrated it. He appeared in his spiritual body only. It left his physical body of flesh, as he said all our spiritual bodies do. No, there's no life in the flesh. Feed it to the vultures. That's what he said. They're his words. So I'll try to explain what probably happened. It's very, certain, based on his teachings, the disciples had to hide his physical body, because he appeared to them in a spiritual body. So then they had to cover it up, and I'll explain why. The most likely logical, intelligent reason, which still is in perfect alignment with everything Jesus taught, but then they had to cover it up for the Jews, because they weren't ready for this truth. Jesus rose from the dead. Yes and no. Whether Jesus rose from the dead after his crucifixion in his physical body of flesh, that was now immortal, or whether his body of flesh decomposed like all our bodies do, and he rose in a spiritual body, we must still become at one with divine love now. I mean, whatever I say here, just remember, regardless of what's going to happen after we all die, which I don't know, I have no personal insight from God or anything like that, or from heaven. I haven't had an angel come into the room and tell me, or golden tablets like Joseph Smith or whatever. But we have to become at one with love. That I do know. That will lead you to heaven. So regardless of the body we have after death of the physical body, it will be different. Obviously, because the physical body's finished. This was his main message: to arise and awaken into a spiritual love for all, like the perfect love of our loving spiritual Creator, and become spiritual children of our loving Creator in the heavenly spiritual world, and be able to live there after life on earth. It is all about love. Unless we live a life of loving others in the spiritual way he taught, no matter what type of body we may have after our body of flesh dies and returns to the earth, we will not be prepared to enter the heavenly spiritual world. The resurrection accounts describe two different types of bodies attributed to Jesus after he rose from the dead body of flesh. Some accounts say he had the same body of flesh that died on the cross, but was now immortal, while other descriptions clearly show he had a spiritual body. Based on his own teachings, I believe that his physical body of flesh died and decomposed after death, but he rose in his spiritual, eternal, heavenly body. This would seem to be the logical, spiritual conclusion, being more in keeping with his actual teachings, as we will see in the following dialogue. It's a bit of a long dialogue, but I'm trying to bring in all of Jesus' words to show you, to prove to you, that he rose not in the flesh, but in a spiritual body. And I'll explain what the disciples most likely had to do. The general teaching of Jesus. If we look closely at the teachings of Jesus, we can see he leaves us with a consistent message from the heavenly spiritual world. Jesus said, "That which is born of the flesh is flesh. That which is born of the Spirit is spirit. Marvel not that I tell you, you must be born again from above. Our Creator is spirit and perfect love. Therefore, to be her spiritual children, you must become perfected through love. Jesus became fully aware that we have two bodies with us right now on earth. One we can see, the body of flesh, and one we cannot see, the body of the spirit and soul. The body of flesh dies and returns to the earth from which it was formed, while the spiritual body and soul return to the source of their origin, the divine loving spiritual creator in the heavenly spiritual world. But we must have lived out of the loving life force in our spiritual bodies and souls while on earth to be able to enter the heavenly world. If we become beasts of the flesh, killing, taking part in wars, robbing, worshipping money and material earthly possessions, being greedy, uncaring, dishonest, self-indulgent, and generally manifest no spiritual love from our loving Creator given to us to live out of, we will not be prepared to enter the heavenly spiritual world. If we created and lived out of a false identity, a shadow figure, replacing our true spiritual identity based only on the flesh, often driven by inflated egos, we cannot join with all the other spiritual children who are in the heavenly spiritual world, living in great joy and love in their spiritual, true identities. Our loving spiritual Creator is love, light, and truth, as Jesus said, and we must be in a similar state to be with her in the heavenly spiritual world. This is quite logical. Jesus is a logical spiritual teaching, if you look at it correctly. As Jesus said, it is the Spirit that gives life. The flesh profits nothing. I repeat, nothing. Jesus' words. The dead body of flesh is just food for the vultures, as it has no life in it anymore. Our body of flesh is dualistic. The flesh body is made of earth elements sustained by earthly foods, water and gases. It operates with biological interactive functions of a chemical nature and provides our brain minds with a limited earthly experience through the senses. These experiences can include various extremes such as great pleasure or pain from the same body of flesh and its biological functions and chemical reactions. It produces various dualistic experiences for us to engage with and to learn from. Our body of flesh also has an inbuilt mind of duality, producing judgmental beliefs, love or hate, help or hinder, comfort or abandon, save or kill, us and them. All different types of thoughts that divide and separate children from each other, from the natural creation we are born into, and from the one true loving spiritual Creator. By itself, the human brain mind cannot reach a unified understanding or view. Only the soul mind of love can achieve that by awakening our spiritual body and becoming at one with the loving spiritual life force that gives us true spiritual life. That's becoming enlightened, as Jesus and Buddha would say. Your true identity. For most of us, it is usually only partially awake, intermittently awake, stagnating, or covered in various degrees of darkness, produced by committing anti-love, dark shadow actions. The children who fully awaken to their spiritual body and soul mind of love are called spiritually enlightened. Jesus was one of these. Our spiritual body and soul mind are singular. The spiritual body and soul mind is singular. It is only empowered by the loving spiritual life force, or Holy Spirit, to use an old term, of our loving spiritual Creator, from whom we receive the offer of this extraordinarily beautiful gift of spiritual life that lies within us to discover and become at one with. The soul mind, once awoken, cannot be disturbed by dualistic thinking anymore, as it sees all things through the life force of love, and only wishes to bring an end to suffering and the causes of suffering. Our spiritual body fits with our flesh body like water in a vase. It perfectly fits whatever flesh shape it is poured into. But our spirit is not the vase, not the biological, temporary body of flesh. The nourishment it draws from is the fountain of living water that wells up inside our soul mind of love and spirit, bringing us to eternal spiritual life. This comes from the source of our spiritual being our loving spiritual creator in the heavenly spiritual world. Once we join with it fully, we will be born again into spirit, for its source is the eternal loving spiritual creator. This is what Jesus was referring to when talking to the Samaritan woman at the well. Jesus said to the Samaritan woman, "If you knew the gift the loving creator offers you, and who I am who says to you, 'Give me to drink,' you would have asked me, and I would have given you her living water. For whoever drinks of this earthly water shall thirst again, but whoever drinks of the water that I shall give him shall never thirst. For the water that I will give him will become in him a fountain of water, welling up into eternal spiritual life." The words of Jesus, when taken into our soul, mind and spirit, and when we immerse ourselves in the truth that they reveal, will act as a catalyst to awaken our true identity as spiritual children of our loving spiritual creator. As Jesus said, "My words, they are spirit and they are life." Those who awaken to this truth shall never thirst again for spiritual life, for they have awoken or been resurrected into their true spiritual identity from the flesh identity. That's what the resurrection really is. You wake up your spiritual body. You better do it. I better too. This is the true meaning of the resurrection Jesus spoke about. Our body of flesh then becomes like a crystal lens in a lighthouse for a while until it shatters, magnifying the light of love awoken in our spiritual bodies and souls within us to shine for all to see. Jesus said, "No one lights a candle and places it under a basket or body of flesh, but they place it on a stand to give light to all who come near it. I am the light of the world. He who follows me will not walk in darkness, but have the light of life." Light dispels darkness, ignorance, and reveals the truth. Just as most plants die without sunlight, so we die spiritually without the love from heaven in us. Jesus had a massive spiritual awakening and realized he had both an eternal spiritual body with a soul mind of love, empowered only by the loving life force of our loving spiritual creator, and also a body of flesh, empowered only by earth foods and elements, with a dualistic brain mind. Jesus referred to this loving life force being in his spiritual body when he said, "I can do nothing of myself, but only what our loving creator shows me to do. Believe that I am in the loving life force of our loving creator, and her loving life force is in me. The words that I speak to you are not of myself, but come from the spiritual life force of our creator, who dwells with me, and she does the works." See, it's the spiritual life force in Jesus' spiritual body that does all the healing. He said that. But you have to have your spiritual body awake to have that life force, you see. That's the key to it. Like all of us, Jesus was very limited with only a physical body of flesh to help anyone. But once he awoke to his true identity as a spiritual child of our loving creator with a soul mind of love and an eternal spiritual body, he could do anything empowered by the spiritual life force she placed in his spiritual body. The spiritual power of pure love is way beyond any physical powers. It is literally otherworldly. It was this loving life force in him that enabled him to perform healings for children's sick physical bodies. So, in the old gospel translations, the Father was in him and he was in the Father, as he said. That's what it means. The loving life force of the loving creator was in him, and he was in the loving life force living out of it in his spiritual body. That's what he's saying. And he wants us to be in the same relationship by awakening to our true spiritual identity and living out of it now. This is how we find the kingdom of heaven within us. It is a direct spiritual connection, but it cannot be seen by human eyes. We must see it through our spiritual eyes of love and manifest it through our actions and words. His body of flesh died, and he rose in a spiritual body into the heavenly spiritual world. Our true life is about our spirit. Various teachings of Jesus clearly showed this was his main message, which leads us into becoming spiritual children of the divine loving spiritual creator in the heavenly spiritual world while here on earth. Jesus said, "You cannot worship and serve the loving spiritual creator and material things at the same time." Jesus said, "Flesh gives birth to flesh, spirit gives birth to spirit. Marvel not that I tell you, you must be born again from above. Jesus said, it is the spirit that gives life, the flesh profits nothing. Jesus said, do not be afraid of illness or those who can kill your body of flesh, but are unable to kill your soul and spirit. Jesus said, what shall it profit a man if he should gain the whole world, but lose his own spirit and soul? Jesus said, for in the spiritual resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, and they cannot die any more. For those who are considered ready to attain to heavenly spiritual life will be like angels in heaven. No longer biological, but spiritual bodies with a soul mind of love to live out of as spiritual children of our loving Creator, who gives us these spiritual bodies to have eternal life in the heavenly spiritual world, if we wish to accept them. It's our choice. Jesus said, the loving Creator is spirit, and those who wish to adore our loving Creator must come to her in spirit and in truth, to be with our loving Creator. The loving Creator did not say to come in the flesh with a dualistic identity. Jesus said, the lamp of the body is the eye. If your eye is single and perfect, then your whole body shall be full of light. But if your eye is imperfect, dualistic, then your body will be filled with darkness. We must understand our loving spiritual Creator correctly. Only the soul mind of love is singular, whole and perfect. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said, the love of our spiritual Creator is perfect. So if we wish to be children of our loving Creator, our love also must be perfect. This is spiritual love, not a brain, mind, dualistic, biological love, given to some and withheld from others. It is commonly known as agape, divine love, perfect love, singular, clear light mind. Jesus said, lay not up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust does corrupt and decay, but lay up for yourselves treasures in the heavenly spiritual world, where neither moth nor rust can decay. For where your treasure is, there your soul will be also. All things in the material world of temporary life decay, disintegrate, and do not last, including our bodies of flesh. Only the spiritual world of love and truth is eternal life. Jesus said, beware and be on your guard against every form of greed, for not even when one has a great abundance does your life consist of your possessions. Our true real life is spiritual and empowered by a spiritual loving life force, not money or material wealth. Jesus said, it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than it is for a man of material riches to enter the heavenly spiritual world. The only good purpose of having great material wealth is to share it with those who have none. Otherwise it may drag your spirit down into the quicksand of the material dirt. Jesus said, the kingdom of the heavenly spiritual world does not come with signs to be observed with the human eye, so no one can say, look, here it is, or there it is, for the kingdom of the heavenly spiritual world is within you. Jesus is talking about our spiritual body and soul mind of love within us, that we must become at one with, that connects us to heaven. Jesus said, the heavenly spiritual world is like a treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and hid, and in great joy over finding it, he sells all that he has and buys that field. Here Jesus is referring to discovering you have a spiritual body and soul mind of love, empowered only by the loving spiritual life force of our loving Creator, in your own earthly field of the body of flesh. And once you become at one with this true spiritual soul identity, you can let go of your flesh identity and material things. You've discovered the treasure. You're spiritual. You've got a spiritual body. It's not going to die. But it better be filled with love, because that's all that it's empowered by. Based on all of these teachings and others that Jesus gave, I believe the physical body of Jesus died on the cross, was buried and decayed, returning to the earth elements from which it was formed, as all our bodies of flesh do. I believe only his soul, mind and spiritual body rose to the heavenly spiritual world. After Jesus died, he appeared in his spiritual body to the disciples, not flesh, and the disciples had to cover up what really happened in order not to frighten away the Jews from believing in him and following his teachings and spiritual way of love. Why cover up the truth, you may ask? Well, this is why. Firstly, we must establish why the disciples altered the facts. We can see the Jewish understanding of having a spiritual body as well as a body of flesh, as Jesus taught, was very undeveloped, as seen in this conversation Jesus had with Nicodemus. Nicodemus, a Pharisee and ruler of the Jews, came to speak with Jesus at night and said to him, "Teacher, we know that you are a great teacher come from God, for no man can do these miracles and signs that you are doing unless God is with him." Jesus answered, "Truly, truly, I say to you, except a man be born again, he cannot see the kingdom of heaven." Nicodemus said to him, "How can a man be born when he is old? Can he enter a second time into his mother's womb and be born again?" Jesus replied, "Truly, truly, I say to you, unless a man is born again of water and the Spirit, he cannot enter into the heavenly spiritual world of the divine loving spiritual Creator. That which is born of the flesh is flesh. That which is born of the Spirit is spirit. Marvel not that I said to you, you must be born again from above. The wind blows where it wishes, and you hear the sound of it, but you know not where it comes from or where it goes. So it is for everyone who is born of the Spirit." Nicodemus said, "How can this be?" Jesus answered and said, "Are you a teacher of Israel and do not understand these things? Truly I say to you, we speak of what we know and testify of what we have seen, but you do not accept our testimony. If I told you of earthly things and you do not believe me, how will you believe if I tell you of heavenly things?" Clearly, even the Jewish spiritual leaders had no idea of the spiritual truth that Jesus knew about. Nicodemus could not even conceive of having a body of anything but flesh, when he thought the only birth is a physical birth from a womb. He did not understand at all that we might have another spiritual body and soul mind of love waiting for us to discover with us right now. He could not grasp what Jesus was saying. The concept was generally foreign to the Jewish children. Jesus had awoken to this spiritual reality and had two bodies alive in one. Most of us have a spiritual body and soul mind that is a bit drowsy at times or even totally asleep, but only a few have it fully awoken and live out of it on earth. And that is the real problem for us. The entire world would change if this awakening occurred within us all. All war would cease. The armaments industry would be dismantled. Children would no longer be trained to kill in armies. Greed and violence would be unheard of. The wealth of the earth would be shared. We would live simple, healthy lives of love, with minimal material possessions, caring for the earth, and although natural physical suffering would still exist, we would never make it worse, only help reduce it. It takes a spiritual awakening for that to happen. Jesus has spent years trying to teach the disciples how to awaken to this spiritual truth, experience it themselves, and then teach the good news to others, and to share the loving life force of our Creator within their souls in spirit by healing the sick and the lame of their physical infirmities. But it was teaching the spiritual way of love that brought those dead to their spirit back to life. That was the main objective of Jesus, to help children reach heaven. But even the Jewish disciples with Jesus were still heavily influenced by the Old Testament teaching of a dualistic God and could not grasp it easily, as seen in this episode. While Jesus was on the way to Jerusalem, he had to pass through a village of the Samaritans and sent messengers ahead to arrange overnight accommodation, but he could not stay longer with them. They did not want to provide accommodation as they were upset that he was not going to stay with them. When his disciples, James and John, saw Jesus being insulted like this, they said to Jesus, "Lord, do you want us to command fire to come down from heaven and consume them like Elijah did?" But Jesus turned and rebuked them, saying, "You do not know what kind of spirit you are of, for I do not destroy men's lives but save them." They were still stuck in the old two-headed God of the Jews. Jesus is at one with this beautiful, divine, pure love. You don't hurt anyone if you're with the divine, pure one in heaven. You don't do that. Even though they were with him constantly, they still had no understanding of their true spiritual identity that Jesus was trying to help them find within themselves to become spiritual children of our loving Creator. Other examples of the disciples not knowing our loving spiritual Creator and how to become her spiritual children of love are found throughout the Gospels. The main point, based on a learned Jewish leader like Nicodemus and his own disciples not understanding the inner spiritual transformation and awakening that Jesus taught to become spiritual children, explains the cover-up by the disciples who said his body of flesh rose, not his spiritual body and soul. The Jews were simply not advanced enough in their spiritual understanding of our spiritual life, our loving spiritual Creator in the heavenly spiritual world, for them to accept it. They simply wouldn't have been able to handle the idea that Jesus appeared to them in a spiritual body. They just had no idea about that. The disciples already saw his spiritual body twice. They didn't realize until he appeared to them after he died, but all the way along Jesus was sort of giving them bits of examples and hints and lots of teachings about this, but they just were so far away from that. It was so foreign to them, they simply couldn't transition easily. It took time. The disciples had already seen Jesus in his spiritual body at least twice while he was alive in the flesh. The first time was when he walked to them on the water in this account, and in the fourth watch of the night Jesus came walking to them, walking on the sea. When the disciples saw him walking on the water, they were terrified and said, "It is a ghost," and they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take courage, it is I, do not be afraid." And Peter answered him, saying, "Lord, if it is you, bid me to come to you on the water." Jesus said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he became frightened and began sinking, crying out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" And they got back into the boat, and the wind ceased, and they were utterly astounded, for they did not understand about the loaves being multiplied either, for their hearts were still hardened. They had no real understanding of the power of the spiritual loving life force, and had yet to awaken spiritually and be born again into their own spiritual bodies and soul minds of love Jesus was trying to teach them about. This is a really beautiful account of two things. Firstly, Jesus had become at one with the spiritual loving life force of our loving Creator, and was now able to have a full experience of his spiritual body and soul mind of love, empowered only by the loving life force of our spiritual Creator. He was fully enlightened spiritually. The spiritual power of our loving Creator can completely override any physical law or physical thing and remain unaffected by it. Jesus simply moved fully into his spiritual body and soul mind of love, and because his spiritual body was not affected by the laws of gravity, he could easily carry his physical body with it over the water. Just the thought from his soul mind, empowered by divine love, made it happen. This is also how he healed sick physical bodies. He was able to do it with just a thought from his soul mind of love and the loving spiritual life force that was now sustaining his awakened spiritual body and soul, flowed out of him to whoever needed it and healed them. So it's that life force just flowing out of him, and he just wished for them to be healed, and the loving spiritual Creator's life force flowing into them, he being a fully awoken child of heaven, the divine loving being of heaven, knowing him now as her son, her child, as we all can be. She then did the work of altering the physicality. Jesus said that. It's she that does the work, or he, the loving Creator. Of myself I can do nothing. He was like a postman just delivering this life force from heaven, and then the heavenly spiritual Creator altered their physicality. That's how powerful that spiritual life force is. But you see, they don't interfere directly with everything on earth, what we're doing. They can guide you and send you little signs and wonders and miracles to help you believe in heaven and guide you to heaven. But we have to have free will to choose to go to heaven. The other option is hell. Don't choose that one. Jesus describes this spiritual loving life force in himself that we can all have in these words. Of mine own self I can do nothing. The words I speak are not my own, but come from our loving spiritual Creator, whose life force lives in me, and whose loving spiritual life force in my spirit enables me to do these works and miracles. Truly, truly, I say to you that whoever believes in me and my teachings will also do these works that I do, and even greater works than these will he do. Everyone can have this spiritual life force in your spiritual body become completely full, and you'll become awakened. But you've got to remove the adventitious negativities that are blocking it. The dualistic mind, love, hate, kill, all that stuff. Secondly, the walking on the water account also provides a good example of all of us through Peter. He's a great example, Peter. Encouraged by the sound of the voice of Jesus coming from what he initially thought was a ghost or spirit, which actually they were seeing his spiritual body, you see. Peter had moved into his soul, mind and spiritual body without even knowing it. But then he took his eyes off Jesus and noticed the physical waves and winds. This broke the spiritual experience he was having through his own soul, mind and spiritual body, empowered only by the loving spiritual life force of the Creator in him, and he fell back into the physical mind of the mortal flesh. So being connected to Jesus like that, having total faith in him, enabled him to shift into his spiritual identity, and his spiritual body came alive through that connection to Jesus. But then, it was a great feat, really, to do that. He must have been really scared, but Jesus was standing, so he thought, well, Jesus is standing, and he said, I can do it, so I will. Faith in Jesus, you see. But he moved into his spiritual body so fully that his physical body was no longer affected by gravity. His spiritual body was so alive now, and it's so powerful. You've got to remember, the loving spiritual world is way more powerful than any warmonger here and their nuclear weapons or whatever. They're like little firecrackers, squibs. They're nothing. Love is the most powerful force, and it can alter anything. So as long as he remained focused on Jesus, he didn't sink. Then he got distracted by the waves. Then he thought, wait a minute, physical bodies can't walk on water. So he shifted back into his physical body's mind, out of his spiritual mind into the physical mind. The Christian Science call it the immortal mind and the mortal mind. Fair enough. So that's Peter. So he goes to sink again, So he then became afraid of drowning and his body of flesh dying. He calls to Jesus for help. And of course Jesus grabs onto him as he grabs onto all of us who feel we are drowning and dying. But he acknowledges Peter's effort to move into his spirit by telling him he was doing well. And he should have kept going and had no doubt about the power of our loving Creator's life force in his spirit to carry him over the water. So that's a beautiful example of Peter beginning to awaken to his spiritual body, but then slipping back into the physical. It's a wonderful achievement, really, for a first-time effort. But he had Jesus there with him, standing on the water in his spiritual body, carrying his body of flesh. Many times throughout the Gospels, Jesus tells us to never doubt the power of our loving spiritual Creator, who is always with us and empowers our soul and spirit through her spiritual life force. She gives to us if we only believe. I also wonder if the spiritual body of Jesus, that would have been full of the light of the divine, was glowing softly as he walked on the water. This would add to their fear, but we do see this glowing effect of the spiritual body in the following account. Jesus said, we'll be filled with light. So it stands to reason in this world it might seem their bodies are glowing a bit. Not an uncommon belief with angels and spiritual beings. The second time the disciples see Jesus move fully into his spiritual body is at the Transfiguration. Jesus took with him Peter, James and John and went up on a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his garments became as white as light. And two other figures appeared talking with him. The disciples were amazed, but fell face down on the ground and were terrified when they heard a voice speak from the sky. And Jesus came to them and said, "Get up, do not be afraid. Tell what you have seen to no one until I have risen from the dead. Body of my flesh." Those words have been left out. Here Jesus displays his spiritual body that was now fully awakened within him and deliberately shows it to the disciples with him. But he tells the disciples not to mention it to the others, as they were not yet ready to understand this. You can see the dialogue here. Jesus has just taken a couple of his main disciples who are perhaps getting a little closer to understanding what he's talking about. And he demonstrates, he reveals his spiritual body to them that's in all our bodies. Not just his, in all our bodies. That's what he's saying. And he showed just a couple of them. It glowed. It was like white, bright light. But they were frightened, and they heard a voice. Blimey, what's going on? And he says, just don't tell anyone you've seen this yet until I've risen from my dead body of flesh. Then you'll be able to say, yeah, we get it. He showed us this spiritual body back at on the hill that day. So we've always got this spiritual body, because you see, he appears in his spiritual body after they kill his physical body on the cross. These guys can recollect, this is the same body we saw on the hill. It's his spiritual body. That's right, he said we've all got one. We've got two bodies in one. They realised his sayings now. We've all got a spiritual body. It all sort of falls into place. The final bit of the jigsaw comes in. He lets them kill his physical body that dies and rots on the earth. He appears to them in a spiritual body, and then the light goes on. We've all got this with us now. That's what he was saying all along. We saw it when he walked on the water. We saw it when he was up on the hill. But there's only a few select ones. He only took just a few to show them. The others mustn't have been ready yet. It's a beautiful dialogue when you look at it correctly, intelligently, logically. Spiritually, it was obviously quite intentional on the part of Jesus to select a few of his closest disciples to see his full spiritual body. And even though they saw his physical body walk up the hill and knew it was him standing there, they were still completely confused to see his spiritual body suddenly appear to be glowing. Again, this shows the enormous challenge that Jesus had to face to bring them out of the Old Testament dualistic God religion of the Jews and into the singularity of the one true loving spiritual creator. They still had no idea that they had this same spiritual body within them as he did, with a soul mind of love empowered only by the loving spiritual life force of our loving creator in the heavenly spiritual world. They still didn't understand it. He knew he would appear to more of them in his spiritual body after he died. So this incident is very important. He told them to wait until he had risen from his dead body of flesh before telling anyone of this. So the three disciples can testify later that they also saw him in his spiritual body at the transfiguration before his body of flesh died. This would help them all realize they must also have these spiritual bodies with them now, but they are dormant, as in most of us. And that is exactly what he is trying to get his disciples and us to all wake up to and realize. This message is always here in this world for those who are listening, that we all have two different bodies, and we must awaken and become spiritual children of our loving spiritual creator in the heavenly spiritual world while here in the flesh. And these spiritual bodies do not die once they come alive by living out of them with the loving spiritual life force that empowers them here on earth. This is the spiritual body of Jesus that they saw after his physical death, to give them a great gift by appearing to them in this way. Life goes on in the spirit after the flesh dies and returns to the earth. So become at one with your true spiritual identity now, and as Jesus said himself, you will not really die at all once the death experience is finished. And as I say, it can be pure agony, death, and you won't think you've got any sort of spiritual life ahead of you at all during the process. It's horrific for many people. But once the piece of meat here in the chest stops moving, called the heart meat, that's it. The umbilical cord is cut. The body can't send your spirit any more experiences at all, good or bad, and your spirit's set free. And that's why you have to prepare your spirit before death, because if you're in a lot of pain, you've lost the opportunity to think about spiritual things. Pain is brutal. So agony, I'm talking about torture and agony. Death can be brutal. So now's the time to establish this strong link. Then you might be able to pass through the torture of death, holding on to this belief in the back of your mind, and you just literally experience the agony of death. It just becomes another experience, powerful, overwhelming. You can't intellectually think about heaven anymore, but you move into it with the heavenly spiritual thought, and you move through it and out of it. Your body's dead and your spirit leaves. Ejected. Ejected out the ejection seat. But the disciples had a big problem after the resurrection when Jesus appeared to them in a spiritual body only. We can see how terrified they were of seeing spiritual beings or ghosts in general. How are they going to convince anyone else of what they now knew about Jesus being resurrected in his spiritual body from the dead body of flesh? For them, that's like science fiction. No one would believe that. If we look at all the accounts following his burial, we can try to untangle the variations and additions that were placed in by the disciples to cover up the spiritual resurrection and replace it with a resurrection of the flesh. This would remove the fear that this would have caused for potential followers of the way of Jesus, thinking he had become a ghost or spirit. Spirits were beings that Jews generally wanted nothing to do with in their culture. Instead, they were generally feared, as we saw with the disciples, who even knew Jesus for years, yet were still frightened seeing him in his spiritual body. You've got to understand the context of the time. I believe Peter and John hid the body on the Friday night after Jesus appeared to the 11 disciples, including Thomas, in his spiritual body, and they went and checked the tomb, finding his dead physical body was still there. If they left it there for the Jews to find, the Jews would call them all liars and charlatans if they said they had seen him alive and well and he spoke to them. Now that's the simple, logical explanation of why they did it. That would mean the end of his powerful spiritual teachings being passed on, as everyone would leave the disciples and go back to following the two-headed God of the Jews. So Peter and John most likely hid the body and agreed on a secret cover story that his body of flesh came back to life and shared the truth with no one. It may be possible that they told the other disciples, and Mary Magdalene may have had an important role, but whoever knew, they all agreed to cover up the truth, but the less that knew, the better. I expect it was just John, Peter and Mary Magdalene. The Gospel authors had a very difficult task to leave clues to lead you to the truth that Jesus rose in a spiritual body, while planting false accounts that he had a body of flesh to cover it up at the time, to make Jesus more acceptable to the Jews. See, that they did put the truth in, it's peppered in amongst it. It's sort of in amongst it, and I'll explain it where you see it, and where you see the cover-ups, the red herrings. The false flesh account stories for the Jews are simple and obvious, but they retained more subtle clues, obvious only to those who understand the teachings of Jesus, such as his spiritual body looking different after he rose, and they did not easily recognize him. I mean, if he had a body of flesh exactly the same, they'd know it was him straight away, wouldn't they? And the most powerful one in John, where Jesus tells Mary not to try and hold on to him. John is obviously telling us Jesus was now in a spiritual body, no longer in a body of flesh like Mary's, and she would not be able to hold him with her body of flesh. It's a really powerful clue in John. John's interesting. They couldn't openly teach it at the time, but now it can be and should be taught. This is the correct understanding of what happened. It's logical, it's intelligent, but it's totally spiritual. So don't worry, you're not going to lose any of your spiritual faith by believing this. It's going to increase your connection to heaven and to the truth of what Jesus taught. You have a spiritual body. It's going to leave your physical body. Get into it now. Become at one with love and non-violence, and you'll awaken it. Follow his other instructions, forgive and be forgiven, etc., etc., and you'll get to heaven. Don't worry about your body of flesh. He even said that. Different gospel writers gave stronger Jewish overlays onto Jesus than others. Matthew was the worst and tried to have followers only see Jesus through a Jewish lens and corrupted some of the sayings to achieve this. John was at the other end and had some of the most spiritually mystical sayings of Jesus about inner transformation, like the Nicodemus and the Samaritan woman at the well dialogues. Blind faith is dangerous. We all must do our best to seek the spiritual truth that Jesus taught by looking only at the words of Jesus ourselves and not the overlays of the Old Testament put onto him. Never mix the old wine of war and limited love with the new wine of universal divine love, or you will taint it and it will no longer be pure. Don't mix the new wine with the old. Don't mix the new understanding of this divine loving spiritual creator in heaven with the old Jewish understanding of God. You'll lose the meaning. You'll poison it. Jesus said, do not try to tear a piece off the new understanding of our loving spiritual creator and try to sew it onto the old understanding of the two-headed God of the Jews, as they do not match, and it will lift off the new from the old. That's what that saying means. The cloth. Don't try to put it onto the old God. It doesn't match. It's a different God. Now, this is the possibilities of how the resurrection story unfolded. Now, I openly admit it's difficult because of the timeline and the sequence. I don't know exactly the sequence and timelines, but I'm fairly certain of the probabilities based on what you read. If you know Jesus, you can see where the faults are, where the false things are. If you don't know Jesus and you've been brainwashed by the Jewish Christians to believe Yahweh is the God of Jesus and the Revelation book is all about Jesus, you got no hope of understanding the truth. You got virtually no hope of understanding this. Jesus rose in a spiritual body. That's the truth. Possibilities of how the resurrection story unfolded. 1. Jesus dies in agony on Friday as his body of flesh is tortured to death on the cross. 2. Jesus' physical body died on the cross, but his spiritual body and soul immediately rose and left it behind. Neither his spiritual body and soul nor physical body rose 3 days later. We see this in a statement he made while being crucified. One of the criminals being crucified alongside him said, Jesus, remember me when you go into the spiritual heavenly world. Jesus replied to him, truly I say to you, today you will be with me in the heavenly spiritual world. His words. I believe that. Correct. Totally. 100% accurate. You see, there's the clue. That's a clue. That's the truth clue. He left in his spiritual body when his heart stopped beating on the cross. That's when he left. That's when he was resurrected from the dead body. There's the clue. They put the truth in, but they had to hide it in amongst some lies. He did not say, in 3 days' time, when my dead body of flesh comes alive again, you will be with me in the heavenly spiritual world. He did not say that. That's a cover-up. That's the red herring they had to put in. That statement to the chappie on the cross, that is correct. That's the truth. You see, the disciples were very clever, really, or they did their best at it. They put in some red herrings and some truths in amongst it. That's the best they could do. The Jews weren't ready for the truth. And today the Jewish Christians still aren't ready because it's been poisoned back at 400 AD. Jesus also taught this spiritual truth applies to all of us, as well as himself, when he spoke about the 2 in a field, 2 women at the millstone, 2 in a single bed and 2 on a couch. Their body of flesh died and is of no use anymore and can be fed to the vultures. That's what he said. And immediately their spiritual body and soul are taken to be near to the one who created them, our loving spiritual creator, to reap as we have sown. That's what he said. They've cut out the words taken to be near to who? They've cut the words out. He would have said, our Father in heaven. I use the terms our loving spiritual creator. Those words have been cut out, but the other words are there. One body sent forth, dismissed, redundant. Feed it to the vultures. There's no life in that body. But her other body, the woman at the well, there's only one woman at the millstone, only one person in the single bed, only one person on the couch, only one person standing in the field. Two bodies. One dies, fed to the vultures. The body of the flesh, the earth body. There's nothing in it. It's dead. Where's the other body gone? It's not even written in the Gospels. They've removed it. The Jewish Christians took it out so they could have their own agenda. Rose from the dead 3 days later, all this stuff. They had to cover it up. They didn't have to, but they did. The Jews wouldn't have understood it. So, he did not say their bodies of flesh will be raised from the dead 3 days later to be near our loving Creator, because they had already left their body of flesh in their spiritual body just as he did. And he did not say there is an apocalyptic last day of judgment at some distant time when their disintegrated body of flesh rises back up from the earth, because the day we die is our judgment day. And we better be ready now, because that is what Jesus is teaching and saying, and it's quite logical and intelligent, isn't it? 3. Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus take down the body of Jesus that Friday evening and place it in a tomb nearby, as it was getting late for the Jewish day of preparation for the Sabbath day which was upon them. They bring a mixture of myrrh and aloes to place around the body of Jesus, as is the burial custom, and they wrap it in a linen cloth. They rolled a stone against the door of the tomb and departed. Friday night. Mary Magdalene alone, or possibly with Mary the mother of Joseph, saw where they placed his body, then went home. They also would have seen them carrying the spices that they took with them to prepare his dead body with. So his body's already been prepared with spices. Mary saw where the tomb was. The disciples all fled in fear because they thought the Jews were going to put them on the cross next, kill them. But the women, of course, much stronger than the men. Full of love for Jesus. 5. Friday night, all of the followers of Jesus were in shock, panicked, and were frightened that they might also be killed for being followers of Jesus. We see this clearly when even Peter denied knowing him 3 times. 2 followers fled the city, probably that afternoon or Saturday evening, on the road to Emmaus, to get away to a safer place. They were talking together about what had happened to Jesus on the road when Jesus came up to them and asked what they were talking about. Importantly, we are told their eyes were kept from recognizing him. They didn't recognize him. He was in his spiritual body, and clearly it is different to his body of flesh, but still in human form. Later, when he was sitting down to eat with them, Jesus took the bread, blessed it, and broke it and gave it to them. And then they realized it was Jesus. When he spoke the familiar words to them, then he vanished out of sight. So when he breaks the bread and blesses it, they suddenly go, the Last Supper event. That's Jesus. That very hour they rose and returned to Jerusalem and found the 11 disciples gathered together. Now remember, Jesus just disappears. He doesn't get up and walk away in his body of flesh. He just completely disappears out of sight. A spiritual angel or Jesus in his spiritual body, they can all do that. They can do that here. They can do it for you or me. I've never seen one, but they can. But the way they appear here is not like our physical bodies, because we're bones and flesh and gases and water, copper and calcium bones. They're spiritual. So that very hour they rose and returned to Jerusalem and found the 11 disciples gathered together. Now that's important. Thomas was also there, as correctly recorded in Luke 24:33. And they told them what had happened on the road and how they realized it was Jesus they saw and spoke with. The long detailed infill about what Jesus said to them in Luke's Gospel is a Jewish overlay addition by the author, and it's false. It's been put in as a red herring. But the other part's true, you see. There's truth in amongst the red herrings. He just disappears after he's talking to them at Emmaus. They don't recognize him. He's in a spiritual body. Luke records Thomas was there in the room, which nullifies the red herring of John's Gospel. You see, John put that one in. Luke nullifies it with some truth. You see how they've worked together or cross-referenced to sort of cancel each other out, but you have to know which one's the right one. I know, because I know Jesus my whole life. I'm not Jewish. I'm not a Jewish Christian. I never have been. Only John's Gospel mentions an account of Thomas not being present and goes to great trouble to establish Jesus had a body of flesh, not a spiritual body, to help cover up the truth. It also maligned Thomas to cast dispersion on the Gospel of Thomas that was also in wide circulation and had some original sayings of Jesus that were later deliberately altered and distorted, in Matthew in particular. That's one of the reasons I had to destroy it, because they altered some of his sayings. This was because the dominant belief taking hold of the early Jewish followers of Jesus wanted to view him through the Old Testament Jewish lens, as being a Jewish sacrificial lamb for our sins. This was shifting the emphasis of his teachings from practicing what he taught to awaken spiritually and become just like him, to worshipping him and placing him on an ivory tower above us all, and no one can be like him, the only child of our loving spiritual Creator, exactly the opposite of what he intended. You see how they've shifted it. This seriously undermines his main message of seeing him correctly, standing beside us, supporting us like the great teacher and loyal friend that he is, even when we fall down, to guide us to follow his teachings and help us awaken to our true spiritual identity too, as children of the loving spiritual Creator in the heavenly world. Jesus saw this problem developing while he was still alive, when he warned his followers, saying, "You call me Lord, Lord, but do not do the things I command you to do." He was already getting trapped into that, pop culture idolization. He didn't want that. They were starting to idolize him or worship him. He's cutting it down here. He's saying, stop doing that. Stop calling me Lord, Lord, and worshiping me. Because you're not concentrating on the words I'm giving you, so you become like me. You'll be the same as me. We're all children of the loving spiritual Creator in heaven, all of us. Wake up. So even there, he had trouble even in those early days. They were worshipping already too much. He was trying to settle that down, Concentrate on becoming like me. Wake up. If we only praise him, it can become an easy out clause not to practice what he said to do. And I've met many Jewish Christians who fall into that category. Bless them. The Gospel of Thomas records sayings of Jesus that concentrate more on personal inner transformation rather than on worshipping him as a sacrificial lamb for our sins. Instead of making him unique and on a level that is unattainable to the rest of us, as seen in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and some of John's Jewish overlays, the Thomas Gospel encourages us to become just like him, equal to him as a spiritual child of our loving Creator. That's why they had to destroy it. It was too truthful. This was the true intention of Jesus, as he said in John 15:15. "No longer do I call you servants, for the servant does not know what the master is doing, but I call you friends. For all things that I know, I have made known to you, so you can be just like me." Equal. We still rely on him to show us the way, so he is still our lifesaver, and we openly acknowledge this and thank him for what he did for us. But I believe he would rather we walk beside him than stay bowed down before him, just praising him. I think he'd be pretty pissed off if you just did that all day long. The Thomas Gospel was most likely banned at the meeting held in Carthage in 397 AD. You see, they had to destroy it. They were already shifting his teachings out of perspective. They were taking him out of focus. So by the early church leaders, and no one was allowed to have a copy of Thomas under threat of punishment, along with other books about Jesus also banned at the time. Thankfully, a nearly fully intact copy was found buried in a jar in 1945 near Nag Hammadi in Egypt. And thank heavens, someone had the foresight way back then to bury secretly a copy of the Gospel of Thomas, because that proves that Matthew's lying in some of his dialogues about the great fish and the wheat and tares parable. It's a beautiful, wonderful thing that's been revealed just last century. So the truth is coming out now, and that's why I'm part of this truth coming out. Cut the Bible in two. Don't study the Jewish religion unless you want to be Jewish, in which case go to the synagogues and be a Jew. If you want to be a Christian, rip out the book of Revelation as well and just look at the words of Jesus, and then you'll be a Christian. But even then you've got to sort through the words, as I'm showing you here. The two followers on the way to Emmaus rushed back to the disciples in Jerusalem that Friday or Saturday night and meet with them and those with them, probably including Mary Magdalene, in the locked room where they had gathered. And while they were telling them about seeing Jesus alive, Jesus suddenly appears amongst them. Again, his spiritual body just appears. He doesn't knock on the door. Can you let me in? I'm in my immortal body of flesh, but I can't get in. The door's locked. Jesus said, it's an immortal spiritual body. I don't mean to, ridicule or put down anyone, but it's just ridiculous, that's all. There's no need for that. This is powerful enough that he has a spiritual body and you've got one. I mean, that takes complete spiritual faith to believe that. I believe it, but it's totally spiritual. I can't prove it to anyone, but I believe it. It's spiritual belief and faith. But it's intelligent and logical. So he appears to them suddenly in the room. He just appears like an apparition of an angel or a spiritual being. Jesus said, "Peace be with you." But they were all startled and frightened and thought they were seeing a spirit. Correct. He was in his spiritual body. There's the clue. It's correct. They're putting the clues in for you, but only those who know Jesus, who are not Jewish Christians and understand his words truthfully and correctly, only we can see this easily. We have to share this with you to help you understand. Don't worry, it's okay. You can let go of your old beliefs and still be totally spiritual. But, I have to be spiritual to believe this anyway. It's a spiritual thing. So Jesus said, "Why are you so troubled, and why do questions arise in your hearts? See, it is I. As our loving spiritual Creator sent me, even so I now send you." And when he said this, he breathed on them and said, "Receive the Holy Spirit." And then he suddenly vanished. Now that's really all that happened. That's all the dialogue complete. That's it. Nothing else. He didn't say anything else. Once you know Jesus, you know that that's most likely all he said. The red herrings he didn't say, so we know we can delete those. But that all makes sense. He gives them the Holy Spirit. He breathes on them. The Greek word for breath is wind, air, breath, spirit. He gives them the Holy Spirit then and there. And then he suddenly vanished. He didn't say, "Can someone let me out this door now?" Someone unlock the door for me. And then he suddenly vanished in his spiritual body. I believe this is the correct version. All the other things were added to make children believe he had a body of flesh by the gospel authors or others, but most likely the gospel authors. But there may have been some other shenanigans going on. The added words are contradictory to the words Jesus spoke to Mary when he appeared to her in his spiritual body. So these are the sort of red herring things that started coming in. Luke adds Jesus saying, so this is the red herring, you see, that's put in. "See my hands and feet," says Jesus. "Handle me and see, for a spirit has no flesh and bones, as you see that I have. Have you anything here to eat?" They gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he ate it before them. Luke's put that in as the red herring. That's his contribution. These words are too specific and clearly contrived by Luke to directly counteract the very thing that was the truth. Here we see Jesus saying to touch him, to prove he has a body of flesh, and give him earthly food to eat. But he says to Mary in John's Gospel not to try and touch him, because he now only had a spiritual body, not physical. And John intentionally includes this clue for those who can see, who are not Jewish Christians. The Luke editions are false and part of a deliberate cover-up to not mention he really had a spiritual body, to protect his teachings from dying out and not frighten the Jews away from following him. 7. I believe this is what likely followed. The disciples would have been in total amazement and bewildered at what just happened. They all know it was Jesus, but they all know he was not in a body of flesh, but a spiritual or ghost body that just appears and disappears. But he was clearly alive and well and spoke to them. They were still not aware we have spiritual bodies as well as physical bodies. They must have had a very intense discussion about what they just saw after witnessing his physical death on the cross earlier that day. How could they tell people they saw Jesus alive and well, but now he was a spirit? Souls or spirits have no form in Sheol, where the dead go according to Jewish beliefs at that time. No Jewish person would want to follow a dead spirit without form from the underworld of Sheol. You see their dilemma? The only way to verify they really did see Jesus was for someone to go to the tomb and see if his physical body was still there. If it was, then they would know for certain that he appeared to them in his spiritual body that he had been teaching them all about for the last 3 years. But it was Sabbath time, and to go out they'd have to go in secret. I believe Peter and John agreed to quietly sneak out later that night, either Friday or Saturday, after Jesus appeared to them, to check the tomb for themselves. So it's most likely Friday night. And you have to remember that they were in a tough position. 8. Although we do not have enough definite information as to what really happened, we can see possibilities based on the accounts. I believe just Peter and John went to the tomb secretly, Friday or Saturday night, after Jesus appeared to them in his spiritual body. They were two of his closest disciples who also saw he had a spiritual body at the Transfiguration. See, they were the two of the ones that saw it. And when he walked on the water, they were there when they saw that, like they all did. So they were in a better position to believe. They already had some knowledge that Jesus gave them about his spiritual body that he didn't give the others. Remember, he said, don't tell them about my spiritual body you saw until I appear to you after I rise from the dead, you see. So it makes sense that Peter and John would be the one that go to the tomb to check. 9. If Mary Magdalene was in the room with them, they would have needed her to show them where the tomb of Jesus was, so would have taken her with them. If she was not there, they would have gone and gotten her. She was a devoted follower of Jesus. When they got to the tomb, Mary either stayed or was sent home by them. They rolled the stone back, went in, and found his dead physical body still laying there. But to make sure it was Jesus and they had the correct tomb, they had to remove some of the linen bandages and put them aside. These are the ones around his face, obviously. And they saw it was Jesus. If Mary was there, she saw it too. If not, only they knew. So at this stage, the truth is only known by 2 or 3 followers. The secret is best kept by 1 or 2, or the minimum amount of people. 10. This was now a serious dilemma for Peter and John as disciples of Jesus, who were entrusted by Jesus to spread the spiritual word, the truth, and the spiritual way to heaven. The truth was that they all saw Jesus alive and well, but after now finding his dead body of flesh, he was obviously in a spiritual body when he appeared to them. How could they deal with this and still tell people the truth? If they told everyone they saw Jesus was alive and well, any Jewish religious authority who hated them and Jesus could just go to the tomb and find his dead body and accuse them of being liars and charlatans. And that could bring an end to people believing them anymore when they shared his teachings. And that would risk the total collapse and destruction of all his spiritual teachings and the spiritual way of love that leads us to heaven. And they would be lost forever. And if they say he had a spiritual body, it will turn people away from following the spiritual way of Jesus because of the belief in Sheol and the formless underworld where all dead souls go. So how could he appear to them if he is formless? The Jews were not ready for this truth. So they covered up the one thing that could threaten to end the spiritual way of Jesus and destroy his spiritual teachings that lead us all to the heavenly spiritual world by hiding his dead body of flesh. It's a fairly simple solution, really. And there's a way they could get away with it because of the Jewish beliefs, which I'll mention, I think, in this possibly. Possibly, we'll see. John and Peter either returned then and told the disciples the dead body of Jesus was still there, and they must have seen his spiritual body, or they did not go back and tell them, but kept it to themselves, and possibly Mary, if she stayed with them at the tomb. There's a possibility they all knew and they all kept it a secret, but like all things, the fewer that know, the better the secret is held. At some point in the discussions about what to do and say, either between the disciples or just John and Peter, and possibly Mary, someone must have suggested a compromise of the truth. They can tell everyone they saw him after he died on the cross and he was alive and well, which is the truth. They can say this with great conviction and honesty because that is the truth. But then, if they say he still had a physical body of flesh, by just adding some fictitious details to the story, as in Luke, it will cover up the truth that he was actually in a spiritual body. Then this might remove any fears about following Jesus for the Jews and save his teachings and spiritual way from being lost. For the Jews were familiar with an Old Testament story about Elijah in 2 Kings 2:11, where they say he was walking along and a chariot and horses swept down from heaven and carried him to heaven while still in a body of flesh. See, the Jews already had that belief in their dialogues. These, wonderful prophets, just a couple, they could actually go to heaven in their physical body. They were just taken up in their physical body. The Jews had that in their dialogue. They had that belief. John and Peter, of course, would have known about it. So they figured, well, how about we just say he was like one of them, like Elijah? We'll just say that. So this might remove any fears about following Jesus for the Jews and save his teachings and spiritual way. That's why they did it. The Jews were familiar with that idea. So it was possible for them to say a similar thing must have happened to Jesus to cover the truth that he actually rose in a spiritual body, while his body of flesh was dead and lifeless, just as he taught them it would be. Feed it to the vultures. That would mean they would have to move the body and hide it so the Jews can't find it. But it was a serious compromise of the truth in a very difficult situation to save his teachings. And I believe that's the reason they did it. And it makes perfect logical and intelligent sense as to why they did it. A real pickle of a situation, The Jews weren't ready to be told Jesus appeared in this beautiful, fine, perfect spiritual body. Even the disciples still couldn't get it till the very end of the Last Supper, where they started, oh, right, okay. Then he appears he dies, and even then they're still sort of shocked at the reality of the teachings when he appears in a spiritual body. So if they were with him for 3 years and still were pretty slow on the pickup, imagine the Jews who had no belief in that whatsoever. They're not going to have anything to do with that idea. So they had to do that. That's why they did it. 13. A secret is best kept by the fewest number. So I believe Peter and John decided not to tell the other disciples. And so after searching for a secret place where no one would ever find it, they took the dead body of Jesus during Friday or Saturday night and sealed it in a secret location. And there it still remains to this day, or what dust is left of it. They left the original tomb door open, along with leaving the linen bandages, the linen cloths that they removed to make sure it was Jesus, for someone else to discover the body was missing. This would take any suspicion off them, and they can act as surprised as everyone else. Then once they hid the body of Jesus, they went back and told the disciples nothing about what they did, and only Mary may have known, and they waited for the empty tomb to be discovered. So they hide his body Friday night, John and Peter. with possibly Mary involved as well. They've already taken the cloths off his face to make sure it was him. Mary said, I think it's that tomb there. They had to check the body. Yep, it's Jesus, all right, but he's dead. His body's dead of flesh, as he said it would be. So when they move his body, they leave these cloths there. They've already unwrapped them, you know. They just sort of forget about them, you know. They're just out of their minds trying to get this organised without being caught. They're not worried about a few cloths hanging around. Then the other possibility is they went back and told all the disciples who were in agreement with what Peter and John did and why it was so important to hide his dead body of flesh to preserve the spiritual teachings and way of Jesus. They were all loyal followers of Jesus and knew the spiritual teachings and way of Jesus were under threat along with themselves, so may have gone along with the plan, but I feel only Peter and John, with or without Mary, were actually involved in the cover-up. That makes a lot more sense. Particularly John's account. His account is the main account. He knew all the story. 15. Mary had an important role in all of this, but it is uncertain to what extent. If she was with John and Peter and saw the dead body of Jesus, then she would be bound to keep it a secret if Peter and John directed her to do so. And she would have known why they were going to hide it, to help protect the teachings of her master Jesus, whom she dearly loved. She'd be only too happy to lie for him. It is quite reasonable to imagine her loyalty and love for him would inspire her to do anything for him to protect the legacy of his teachings. We can recall how Mary sat at the feet of Jesus listening to him teach when he visited her house while Martha was busy serving drinks and food. If that is the case, then they may have agreed that Mary could come to the open tomb on Sunday morning, find it open and come and tell them, but act surprised. If they sent Mary home after she led them to the tomb, then her involvement was accidental. I think Mary knew. 16. If it is Peter, John and Mary, they would have had to do this under cover of dark while not being noticed by any Jewish authorities. But great things can be achieved and fear overcome when love and loyalty is the driving force. If we follow the real possibility that only these three know the truth, then on Sunday morning, Mary goes to the open tomb by herself as planned, or accidentally, and the tomb is still open, and no one has discovered it yet. 17. It is now very interesting that in John's account, after Mary finds the tomb, now this is really interesting. So Mary finds the tomb empty in John's account. She goes to only tell, guess who? Peter and John. She doesn't tell the others. She goes only to tell Peter and John of the empty tomb, none of the other disciples. A perfect execution of a secret clandestine action by three of the most dedicated followers of Jesus to protect his teachings and spiritual way from destruction, if it works and everyone believes the cover story. And since John is writing the gospel, he can adjust anything in any way he wants to fit the desired outcome. That's a real giveaway, that. She only goes and tells Peter and John. 18. Peter and John go with Mary to the tomb, all knowing it is empty, and then Peter and John just go home, but can now tell everyone that Mary found the tomb empty, and they went and checked, and the body of Jesus was not there. See, Mary becomes a sort of, the sort of one who does it, that deflects the blame off the disciples. Or not the blame, but the Jews would have blamed them if they said, we found it empty, Oh, this woman Mary found it. She came and got us. We didn't know, If all the remaining disciples saw Jesus in his spiritual body on Friday or Saturday night, but did not know what Peter, John and Mary did, then it would be easy to convince them that Jesus must have appeared to them in his body of flesh because of the empty tomb. Just like Elijah, who's swept up to heaven in the chariot alive while he's just walking along in his body of flesh. 19. Mary stays at the tomb after Peter and John leave, and then John records this powerful encounter between Mary and Jesus, where he is clearly describing the body of Jesus is a fully spiritual body that Mary cannot hold. But later, he adds the very strong doubting Thomas story saying the opposite, that Jesus was in a body of flesh, to throw in the red herring and help with the cover-up that he and Peter set up. He did not want to destroy the spiritual truth about Jesus rising in a spiritual body, so made that reference more subtle and the false flesh references far more obvious. As Jesus said, "He who has ears to hear, let him hear." So John does a really amazing thing. He gives you the most powerful clue. Jesus was in a spiritual body. Mary could not hold him anymore in her body of flesh. Then he adds the Thomas account, which is only in John. But we know from Luke, Thomas was actually there. He wasn't missing. It's a made-up red herring. So John provides you with two of these really powerful clues. Which one's correct, do you think? I'm not a Jewish Christian, so it's easy for me. He had a spiritual body. 20. They had to wait until Sunday to start telling people that he appeared to them and they saw him alive and well, to give them time to hide his body of flesh. And since the tomb was not technically discovered empty until Sunday, that fed into saying Jesus rose on the third day, instead of the day he actually died, which is what he said on the cross. Jews also believed it took 3 days for your soul or spirit to leave your body and go to Sheol. So they just had to switch from saying his spirit left on the third day to his body left on the third day. It was easy for the Jewish gospel authors to just add the words "in 3 days" in the right place, or search through the Old Testament to find references of being raised from the dead after dying, with some specifically saying on the third day, to help cover the story. 21. The main purpose of the teachings of Jesus was to raise those dead to their spirit back to true spiritual life. That was his main purpose. The dead flesh profits nothing. Feed it to the vultures. He constantly taught not to worry too much about your body of flesh, as it is only food for the vultures at the end, but rather be concerned about the state of your spiritual body and soul, mind of love, which need to be alive and healthy to enter the heavenly spiritual world. That's a fact. 22. There are only 3 accounts in the Gospels, repeated in Mark, Luke and Matthew, of Jesus actually saying himself that he will be killed and rise again on the third day. It would be easy for the writers to insert the words "in 3 days," on the third day. He was certainly predicting his upcoming fate and death and resurrection, but based on his own teachings, he more likely said, "I will be killed, but will rise again." That's what he says. They just slip in the 3 days to help the cover-up, you see. It's all a cover-up. As he said, "I lay down my physical life in order to take my spiritual life up again. I have power to lay it down and power to take it up again." He had a spiritual body and a physical body. He laid down his physical life, took up his spiritual life. He had 2 bodies. That is what he's saying. He now had his living spiritual body as well as his body of flesh, as he taught that we all have if we only searched for it. That's why he was able to tell them these things in advance. He knew he had 2 bodies. They were both living and well. The butterfly and the caterpillar were alive at the same time. Most of us, we don't know we've got a butterfly body until our body of flesh drops dead. The caterpillar dies and suddenly, oh, what's this new body I've got? Oh, it's like a butterfly. We hope and pray. You're heading in the right direction. Flesh only gives birth to flesh. Spirit only gives birth to spirit. Marvel not that I tell you, you must be born again from above in spirit. He says this over and over and over. You've got 2 bodies, they're different. Wake up. There are 2 other sayings inferring he will rise in 3 days. One in John, where he refers to rebuilding the temple in 3 days, saying, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days," that's been inserted, "I will raise it up." Jesus is referring to his spiritual body, but it would be easy to insert the "in 3 days" words here also, to help reinforce the cover-up story. The in 3 days, wherever that's mentioned, that's inserted. Jesus simply said, destroy this temple and I will raise it up. The temple holds the spirit, right? The temple of the body holds the spirit. Knock down this temple of flesh on a cross. Don't worry, I'm going to raise it up, my body. My spiritual body. One of the other major Jewish overlays to cover up the truth is using Jonah in 1:17. And the Lord appointed a fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the stomach of the fish for 3 days and nights before coming out. It's a motif that runs through the Jewish religion. In Matthew 12:40, the gospel writer has Jesus saying this about himself. See, Matthew slots all this old Jewish stuff in to cover up the story. An evil and adulterous generation craves after a sign, and no sign will be given it, but the sign of Jonah the prophet. For just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a whale, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. Matthew made that up. Jesus never said that. But Jesus was not in the earth for 3 days, as he said on the cross. He was leaving to enter the heavenly spiritual world that very day. That's what he told the other thief on the cross. Matthew made it up. I believe Matthew has written these words himself to help with the cover story, and even gone so far as to have Jesus say them, to make them sound more authentic. I mean, what better way to confuse you than for the author to say, Jesus said this, even though the author made it up. The words on the cross that Jesus spoke to the other thief, they are correct. This day you will be with me in paradise, in heaven. This day, my spiritual body is going to go to heaven, and you're coming with me. They're correct. Believe them. Don't believe this. You've got to make a choice, because they're different. 23. Although not in the Gospels, Hosea 6:1-2 is a favourite of Judeo-Christians to show he rose on the 3rd day. So they go back to the old Jewish Testament and lay it on top of him to destroy his message. Come, let us return to the Lord, for he has torn us, but he will heal us. He has wounded us, but he will bandage us. He will revive us after 2 days. He will raise us up on the 3rd day, that we may live before him. They place this Jewish saying as a false overlay onto Jesus. They say, see, this happened in the Jewish religion, so it must have happened to Jesus. Jesus wasn't a Jew. He was a spiritual child of a loving spiritual creator. He was not the son of Yahweh, because there are 2 Yahwehs. Wake up. 24. Jesus said he was leaving the earth immediately, not in 3 days' time, to the thief beside him the day he died on the cross. They are the words I trust and believe as being correct, because he taught that we have 2 different bodies with us right now. One stays and is food for the vultures when it dies, and one leaves and hopefully enters the heavenly spiritual world at the time of our death. It is a logical, intelligent, yet totally spiritual way of understanding the words of Jesus and what our life on earth is all about. The added cover-up words. The Gospel writers of Matthew, Luke and John have all placed in additional words to make it appear that the dead body of flesh and blood of Jesus, after being killed by the Jews, came back to life and was still a body of flesh and blood. Mark and the Thomas Gospels do not say that. The writers left clues about the truth that Jesus actually had a spiritual body and not a body of flesh. Any more amongst the fabrications for those who read the teachings of Jesus and understand what he was really saying. Flesh only gives birth to flesh, spirit only gives birth to spirit. Marvel not that I tell you, you must be born again from above into your spiritual body. You can't say it any more plainly than that. So they left clues and red herrings. It's very interesting that they did that. They knew that anyone who understood his words correctly, and who's not a Jewish Christian in modern terms, they know which ones are correct and which ones are the red herrings. Matthew's fabricated cover-up words. Matthew's the most distorted gospel, unfortunately, but it's also got some of the most beautiful things in it, you see. Again, you've got this contradictions of the red herrings, the false Jewish overlays, in amongst the Sermon on the Mount, the beautiful teachings of truth. 1 Matthew 27:62. On the next day after the preparation, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered together with Pilate and said, Sir, we remember that when he was still alive, that deceiver said, after 3 days I rise again. Here Matthew consolidates the 3-day cover story. This whole thing is made up. You won't find it in the other Gospels. Therefore, give orders for the grave to be made secure until the 3rd day. Otherwise his disciples may come and steal his dead body away and say to the people, he has risen bodily from the dead. And the last deception will be worse than the first. Pilate said to them, you can have a guard of Roman soldiers. Go make it as secure as you know how. And they went and made the grave secure, and along with the guard, they set a seal on the stone. Even the disciples had little idea he was actually going to rise from the dead. John even says this. Then the other disciple who reached the tomb first also went in and believed, for as yet they did not know the scriptures that he must rise from the dead. John's saying that even when he and Peter reached the tomb, I mean, he's covered it up, of course, but he's pointing out that the disciples didn't realize that he was going to rise in a spiritual body. They didn't realize it. That's what he's saying. Why would the Pharisees, who believed nothing Jesus said or taught, be worried about it? It is easy to see how Matthew is attempting to cover up the truth front on by writing exactly what really happened, that the disciples did hide his dead body, and then providing this storyline to counteract and deny it, setting up the truth and then knocking it down with a fabricated story. It is also very hard to believe Pilate would bother with such a request. He crucified Jesus as the Jews wanted, and then he washed his hands of the whole affair. When these Gospels were written 50 to 70 years after the death of Jesus, no witnesses were alive to deny these fabrications. That's a completely fabricated cover-up story, and it's again very specific. You know, the disciples did hide his body. Matthew 28:1. Now after the Sabbath, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to look at the grave. This is Matthew's version. And behold, a severe earthquake had occurred, and an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and rolled away the stone and sat upon it. And his appearance was like lightning, and his clothing as white as snow. The guards shook for fear of him and fell as if dead. The angel tells the 2 women, Jesus is not in the tomb, but has risen, and they must go and tell the disciples he will meet them in Galilee. And they left the tomb to run and tell the disciples. And behold, Jesus met them and greeted them, and they came and held on to his feet and worshipped him. Mary Magdalene now is holding on to Jesus' feet in Matthew. Do not be afraid, but go and tell my brethren to leave for Galilee, and there they will see me. Here Matthew consolidates the cover-up that Jesus had a body of flesh by saying the 2 women held Jesus by his feet, one being Mary Magdalene. This must have been put in to try to override the true account in John of Mary meeting Jesus in his spiritual body and Jesus clearly saying, you cannot touch me now, Mary, because he had a spiritual body, not flesh. So Matthew really covers up and distorts a lot of things. Matthew's the worst. Supposedly the guards of Pilate are witnesses to this event of an angel miraculously rolling back the stone, not Peter and John, as I believe is what really happened. So Matthew manages to provide an angelic being as the one who rolled back the stone, not the disciples, as another fabricated piece of the cover-up story to divert people from believing it actually was the disciples. Now, while the women were on their way to tell the disciples, some of the guard came into the city and reported to the chief priests. They reported to the chief priests all that had happened. And when they had assembled with the elders and consulted together, they gave a large sum of money to the soldiers and said, you are to say, his disciples came by night and stole him away while we were asleep. And if Pilate hears about this, don't worry. We will talk to him and take care of it and keep you out of trouble. And they took the money and did as they had been instructed by the Jews. And this story was widely spread among the Jews and is to this day. Here Matthew continues to use his fabricated Roman guard story to further the cover-up. Firstly, why would Roman soldiers go to the Jewish chief priests to report what supposedly happened instead of to Pilate? Secondly, it would be worth more than their life if Pilate found out they fell asleep at their posts and they took a bribe from the Jews to lie, than rather just tell Pilate what happened. And it would be highly unlikely Pilate could care less about what the Jewish priests said to defend his Roman soldiers who fell asleep at their posts. None of this makes any sense whatsoever. It's not logical, it's not intelligent. In Matthew's account of the risen Jesus, he openly appears to the two women and later at Galilee to the 11 disciples. So he only appears to the two women. He doesn't appear in the room. Now Luke's fabricated cover-up words. So Matthew really does a lot of covering up and Jewish overlays and apocalyptic stuff. It's terrible. But he's got the beautiful Sermon on the Mount, you see. The red herrings in amongst the truth. It's all through the Gospels. If you're a Jewish Christian, you won't understand. I'm sorry. You've got to be a Christian to understand. Luke 24. While they were telling them these things, Jesus stood in their midst and said to them, so this is Luke's version, "Peace be to you." But they were startled and thought they were seeing a spirit. There's the clue. He was a spirit, which they were seeing. And he said to them, "Why are you troubled? And why do doubts arise in your hearts?" So Luke's got some of the correct words of Jesus written. They thought he was a spirit. That's actually correct in two ways. These are the only accurate words recorded by Luke of the spiritual appearance of Jesus to the disciples. He's put a bit of truth in, you see. There's the clues. Other words extending from these words are found in John and must be added to form a more accurate and complete statement of Jesus. All that follows is fabricated to help the cover-up story that he rose in a body of flesh and blood, not a spiritual body. We even see Luke go so far as to put these words in the mouth of Jesus himself, denying he was in a spiritual body. A very powerful and simple way to get people to believe the cover-up story who do not understand the teachings of Jesus correctly. So Luke has Jesus saying this. Jesus said, "See my hands and feet, that it is I myself. Touch me and see, for a spirit does not have flesh and bones, as you see that I have." And when he said this, he showed them his hands and feet. While they still could not believe it, because of their joy and amazement, he said to them, "Have you anything to eat?" And they gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he took it and ate it before them. Here Luke also counteracts the truthful John account of Jesus telling Mary quite correctly not to touch me, by simply having Jesus say the opposite. "Go ahead, touch me." So suddenly he's saying the opposite in Luke's account to cover it up. It's a red herring. And he has Jesus himself saying he is not a spirit in a spiritual body. Luke even has Jesus saying the words, you see. It's much more easy to believe that, even though it's wrong. Then he further consolidates the cover-up story by getting Jesus to voluntarily eat some fish to prove he has a body of flesh just like theirs still. Remember, he just appears and disappears. So the fish, I guess, becomes sort of spiritual once he eats it. in immortal spiritual food. Oh, I wonder if they had some toilet paper there. Anyway, not to worry, in case you needed to go to the toilet. He was in a spiritual body. Here Luke also counteracts the truthful John account of Jesus telling Mary quite correctly not to touch me by saying, "Go ahead and touch me." So he gets him to eat some fish in this story. And then he alludes that Jesus still has wounds in his hands and feet. So he obviously is alluding, Jesus says, "See my hands and feet, the wounds in my physical body." Now that doesn't make any sense at all. He also alludes that Jesus still has wounds in his hands and feet, which goes directly against what Jesus said about all those who enter the heavenly spiritual world have perfect bodies like angels. But he can appear and disappear and looks like a spirit. No wonder they had to overwrite so many things to cover up the obvious truth, which they still had to include, but then knock down with false fabrications. I mean, Luke is saying that Jesus had wounds in his wrists. They don't nail your hands, they nail your wrists because of the bone structure. So wounds in his wrists here and wounds in his feet were still there on his physical body, yet he's risen to heaven where everything is perfect. It doesn't make sense. It's incorrect. It's against everything Jesus taught. But they had to put it in for the Jews mainly, to help cover it up so they're not too frightened about Jesus being the spiritual body. But the clues are in amongst it if you know Jesus. If you're a Jewish Christian, you'll be brainwashed into just believing this and not even think about it. Never mind. It's all there in the truth. Just follow him to heaven. He can still lead you there. Don't worry about that. Even if you're a Jewish Christian, you can still go to heaven. I'm not saying you're not going to go to heaven, that's for sure. I'll never say that. I'm just pointing out the truth amongst the cover-ups. Now Jesus said to them, "These are my words which I spoke to you, that all things which are written about me in the law of Moses and the prophets and the Psalms must be fulfilled." Then he opened their minds to understand the scriptures, said to them, "Thus it is written, that the Christ would suffer and rise again from the dead on the third day, and repentance for forgiveness of sins will be proclaimed in his name to all the nations, beginning from Jerusalem. You are witnesses of these things, and behold, I am sending forth the promise of my Father upon you, but you are to stay in the city until clothed with power on high." That's incorrect. Jesus gave them the Holy Spirit by breathing on them when he appeared to them in the room. Luke's made that up, and all that writing's made up. It's all about the third day stuff, and he's a sacrificial lamb on the cross. It's all made up. It's a cover-up. It's a red herring. It doesn't really matter, as long as you know the truth, that he had a spiritual body, not a body of flesh. Here, the rest of what Luke has Jesus saying is just a collection of prophetic promises about Jesus himself, and includes some Jewish overlays about Jesus rising on the third day, and the sacrificial lamb idea that he died for our sins. These have all been fabricated by Luke to see Jesus through a Jewish lens as a sacrificial lamb killed to cleanse us of our sins, and who rises back to life on the third day like Jonah. All Jewish overlays from the Old Testament religion of the Jews. In this version of events, they have to wait to receive the Holy Spirit. But in John's more correct version, Jesus himself gives it to them when he appears in his spiritual body, which makes more sense. He was totally spiritual. He just gave them the spiritual life force from heaven straight into them. John's fabricated cover-up words. John and Peter were the probable ones to hide the dead body of Jesus, possibly with Mary's help. So John can easily craft a personal cover-up story, which is certainly the most comprehensive account of finding the empty tomb by himself, Peter, and Mary. But he also placed in the most powerful, accurate account of Jesus now being only in a spiritual body when he appeared to Mary for those who could see through the cover-up overlays. See, John gave you the truth and the red herring. See, it's a way of just making it all a bit fuzzy so the Jews aren't frightened. The overlays were deliberately placed in to protect the teachings of Jesus being lost, and so people would still follow the teachings and spiritual way of love of Jesus. That's why they did it. They didn't want these to be destroyed by the Jews discovering the dead body of flesh of Jesus. John's general dialogue is mostly accurate. Mary finds the tomb opened on the third day after Jesus was murdered. She goes and tells only John and Peter, who go with her to the tomb, either already organised to do so, or she was perhaps just an innocent sort of bystander that they used. She was like the little sort of the guinea pig person who had to find it. They have They have a look at the empty tomb, and John says he and Peter just go back home while Mary stays. Then we have this powerful, accurate account of Jesus appearing only in his spiritual body, which rose from his dead body of flesh, to Mary. Obviously, Mary told John about this, which only confirmed for John that Jesus was now alive in a new spiritual body, having already seen him in his spiritual body also on either Friday or Saturday night. As with all the other appearances of Jesus after his body of flesh died, they do not easily recognize him. Mary thinks he is the gardener. John also puts in cover-ups like Luke when we read, "On the evening of that day, the first day of the week," another third-day cover-up, "the doors being shut where the disciples were, for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood among them and said to them, 'Peace be with you.' When he had said this, he showed them his hands and his sides. Then the disciples were glad when they saw it was the Lord." See, there's the cover-up. Now Thomas, one of the 12, called the twin, was not with them when Jesus came. Yes, he was. Luke said so. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see in his hands the print of the nails, and place my finger in the mark of the nails, and place my hand in his side, I will not believe." How graphic is that? That is really graphic, isn't it? Oh, he must have had a body of flesh. Look how graphic John's describing it. It's a red herring. 8 days later, his disciples were again in the house, and Thomas was with them. The doors were shut, but Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands, and put your hand and place it in my side. Do not be faithless, but believing." Thomas answered, saying, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said to him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who did not see me, but believe." Now that's a really graphic account of having a physical body with big wounds in it. He's still got wounds in his body, yet he's gone to heaven, the perfect world of heaven. It's a cover-up, but it's a really graphic one, really powerful. But the interesting thing is, it actually complements the other very powerful, the most powerful message that Jesus had a spiritual body that John gives you. I'm not surprised it's John at all. Mary couldn't hold him. Jesus told her, "You can't hold me, Mary. I'm not in a physical body anymore." So he gives you two of the most powerful truths and red herrings. He gives you the truth, he's in a spiritual body. Really powerful. Mary, you can't hold me. Then he gives you this extremely graphic dialogue. "Thomas, put your finger in the wound in my hand here. Stick your hand in the wound in my side where the spear went. See, stick it in there. Now you'll believe, It's really graphic. But the other one is the truthful one. This is the red herring. This only appears in John, and Luke said Thomas was there when with the other. The 11 disciples were there when he appeared to them in the room. This is wrong. It's a false red herring that John put in. They did it for a reason, you see, to try to help put the truth in amongst it for those who can see, who know Jesus, know what his teachings mean. But to cover it up so the Jews weren't frightened. Had a body of flesh. Well, they're familiar with that story. It's in their old Jewish religion. That happens sometimes. Great prophets are suddenly whisked away in their body of flesh, so that they could sell that to the Jews, that cover. John crafts a very interesting contradiction. He gives the most powerful graphic description using a fabricated Thomas dialogue of Jesus still having a body of flesh and blood with wounds and openings still in it from the crucifixion. They haven't even healed up. Do they ever heal up in heaven? Or have you got your broken leg there all the time? It doesn't make sense. It's not logical. It's not intelligent. It's not spiritual. So open that Thomas could stick his fingers in them. How long does it take for our perfect angelic bodies to heal? But he also provides them, because you've got to remember this is like a week later or something, John's saying, so his body still hasn't healed. What's going on? If you have a big scar on your face, do you have it in heaven forever, do you? It's not correct. not intelligent, it's not logical, it's not true. But he also provides the most powerful description of Jesus really only having a spiritual body when he appears to Mary. John now knew we have spiritual bodies as well as a body of flesh, as Jesus taught. John really knew it now, but he knew he had to cover it up to save the teachings. Otherwise the Jews could have turned everyone against them if they found Jesus' dead body of flesh. That's why they had to do it. But he had to compromise that truth to protect the spiritual way and teachings of love Jesus taught that brings our spiritual bodies to life. The Jews were not ready to understand or believe that we have two different bodies with us right now. One stays and returns to the earth from which it was formed. One leaves to reap what it has sown and returns to the source from which it was formed. A spiritual being of perfect love and a creator of true spiritual life, who placed our spiritual bodies in our bodies of flesh to become at one with and leave this material world of suffering at the time of our death and enter the heavenly spiritual world. What a blessing. John seems to be the most aware of the two-body teachings of Jesus and faithfully passed it on, in amongst the red herring distractions for those who truly understand the teachings of Jesus to find. As Jesus often said himself after a teaching, "He who has ears to listen correctly, let him understand what I am really saying." I love John's gospel. It's really ethereal, it's really spiritual, and he gives this really powerful message. Mary couldn't hang on to him with her flesh anymore. He was in his other body, and it didn't have wounds on it. Fair dinkum. What are there doctors in heaven, like, bandaging your wounds or something? Mark's gospel has no body of spirit cover-ups. The original ending of the Gospel of Mark has no account whatsoever of Jesus actually appearing to anyone in any form after his body of flesh was killed on the cross. It has Mary and two other women finding the tomb empty, and an angel appears telling them Jesus has risen and he is not here, and tells them to go and tell the others. He will see them later in Galilee. They are frightened and leave, telling no one about it. That's how Mark's gospel originally ended. Most scholars agree that an additional general ending was compiled by someone and added to Mark to bring it into alignment with the other three gospels. All intelligent scholars in the world agree that that is exactly what happened. And when you read it, you can see it's just a general compilation of general stuff from the other gospels tacked on to Mark. Mark ends with an angel telling the girls, Jesus isn't here anymore, he's risen in his spiritual body. Now go and tell the others that he'll meet them in Galilee. And they head off, but they're so frightened, they tell no one about it. They don't tell anyone. They don't tell the disciples. That's how Mark's gospel actually ends. I mean, it is possible, they saw his dead body in the tomb and were so frightened, they didn't want to tell anyone, and they just ran away. But we don't know about that. But that's how Mark's gospel originally ended, and then they tacked something on. It's an addition. This is the same account found in Matthew regarding the angel saying the same thing, except after seeing the angel, they do go and tell the disciples. So Matthew's account is almost exactly the same, but they actually go and tell the disciples, he wants you all to meet him in Galilee somewhere. I feel John's account is the most revealing of the truth about his body rising in spirit, not flesh. But John also has the strongest red herring. Stick your finger in my wound, Thomas. Put your hand in the side of my flesh, Thomas, where this big sword gash is. He's been in heaven now, according to John, for a couple of weeks or something, a few weeks. But his body still hasn't healed. I'm sorry. That's incorrect. You have a body like an angel as soon as you enter heaven. Angels' bodies are perfect, and they're only filled with a loving life force, and they can't get hurt or injured or die. It's a cover-up. But they had a good reason. You've got to understand that. It was a good reason. If the Jews found Jesus' dead body of flesh rotting, they would have slammed the disciples, and the whole of Jerusalem would have known, absolutely, Jesus' dead body's rotten over there. Go and look at it yourself. They're lying that they saw him. They're all liars. And everyone would have known, yep, they're right. Yeah, the Jewish leaders are right. It is there. Yeah, Bob went and saw it. It's dead, all right. They couldn't have seen Jesus. And that would have been the end of all these beautiful parables, beautiful ways, beautiful teachings of spiritual love and the way that leads you to heaven and to awaken to your spiritual life. So the disciples made a really important decision to hide his body, to protect the teachings, which I have now heard 2,000 years later. So they sort of did the right thing, really, as far as I'm concerned. But the problem we got now is it's been sort of cemented in. And there aren't enough Christians, they're all Jewish Christians in the world mostly, and they believe Yahweh is the God of Jesus, which is the God of the Jews, not the God of Jesus. So there's all this confusion now. So I'm just trying to untangle it. The Thomas Gospel does not mention the resurrection. The Thomas Gospel, while not mentioning the classic resurrection of Jesus from a tomb, it concentrates more on Jesus' teaching throughout the Gospel about us all having two different bodies with us right now. And we must become at one with our spiritual body filled with light and love to have real life after our body of flesh dies. In the Gospel of Thomas, the overriding theme is to follow the spiritual way of Jesus and become like Jesus and awaken into our spiritual body before the flesh dies and returns to the earth. Then we will find ourselves in the heavenly spiritual world beyond all suffering, which I believe is exactly what Jesus intended. It's in the other Gospels too, but Thomas is really strong. It hasn't got any Jewish apocalyptic overlays in it. Children who follow the spiritual way of Jesus and believe in a heavenly world of love and one true source of spiritual life are prepared to leave their dead body of flesh behind. For as long as they just live out of their spirit of love while here on earth, they will be ready to enter the heavenly spiritual world. Then we will see what an angel's body really looks like, because we will all have one. But if you believe you only have a body of flesh, you may not search for your inner spiritual body and soul mind of love now to become at one with and be ready to leave in it at this time of your physical death. Whereas Jesus clearly advised us all, the kingdom of heaven is within you. Seek and you will find. In the last words of the Beatles' last song in their last studio album, I'll bring the Beatles in on this, and in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make. Simple and beautiful words, not a bad little tune either. And that is all Jesus was really saying too. And his last words of advice to us all in the Gospel of John are, follow me to where I've gone. They are not, I'm coming back, hang around for a while. So that's why the disciples had to hide his body of flesh. They did it for a good reason, to preserve his teachings. God is love, love is life. Jesus taught we all have two bodies. One is made of earth and returns to the earth. One is formed from a spiritual life force and returns to the source of that spiritual life force, our loving spiritual creator. In the heavenly spiritual world, one lives on and one dies. Jesus brings those dead to their spirit back to true life, beyond the death of the body of the flesh. That's what his teachings are all about. And Buddha's too. There's another world. It's spiritual. How do I get there? Well, you've got to have a spiritual body. Where do I buy one? You've already got one. Where is it? It's within you. How do I find it? Read the words of Jesus and he'll explain to you how to find it. How do I become at one with it? Read the words of Jesus and he'll explain how you become at one with it. How do I know I've got it? You will feel the loving spiritual life force of heaven flow into you once you get rid of the adventitious negativities that are blocking your connection to heaven. So that's why the disciples had to hide his dead body of flesh. For a very legitimate and good reason, in a very tough position. They couldn't leave it there for the Jewish leaders to find. They had to say they saw him again in his spiritual body, alive and well, no wounds on his body, perfect spiritual body. They had to say that because that's the truth, and that is exactly what he was teaching all along anyway, but they took a long time to get it because they were Jewish. They'd been indoctrinated into worshipping a two-headed God. They had no idea about we've got two bodies that are different, but both alive, one only temporary, the other one eternal. They didn't know you could move into it now and bring it alive and be with it and in it and live out of it now and express it through your physical body for a little while before you leave in your spiritual body. They had no idea of that concept. So Jesus had a tough time. How do you deliver something as high a truth as that to people who've got such a low understanding? It takes time. And that's why they had to cover it up with the red herrings, so the Jews weren't frightened away. And that's why they had to hide his dead body. If they didn't, then they may not have been able to say they saw him alive. Because, the Jews would just go and check. But if they didn't say that, then the entire reason he died on the cross, to release his spiritual body fully from his body of flesh, would also not have been recorded. You see, so they were in a real bind. They had to say they saw him. But he looked different. Of course he looked different. He was in a spiritual body. It looked like him a bit, but until he spoke or did something, an action, Mary didn't recognize it was him until he said the word Mary. Once she heard that name, her name, and his voice say Mary, she realized it was him, even though it didn't really look like him, like he used to be, like when he was in his body of flesh. So that's how they've put in the truth for those who are who only look at his teachings and can see the Jewish overlays quite easily. As I say, I'm not a Jew. I'm not a Jewish Christian. So those things stand out like, certain things very, very strongly. They really stand out like sore thumbs. And the red light goes on whenever I see them. The red light goes on, what's that doing there? That shouldn't be there. That's not Jesus. And then when you investigate it, you find out where it's come from, the old Jewish Testament, all that sort of stuff. Someone's overlaid it. So it's easy for a Christian to see this, but it's very difficult for a Jewish Christian who's been brainwashed and indoctrinated into believing that the Jewish God Yahweh, the two-headed God of the Jews, is the actual same source of Jesus. Jesus' inspiration and spiritual life force. It's not. His life force comes from a pure source of only love. A being that's consciousness is so beautiful and so pure in love, so decent and clean, that for me to come into her presence right now, I'd feel like an urchin, a dirty urchin. Not that I'm filthy with sin or anything, but she's so perfect in love, I've got to try harder to also be perfect in this love as much as I can. I've got to perfect my love. So at least I can say in her presence, well, I've done my best to wash myself clean with this bucket of words that Jesus gave me in this sponge. Thanks, Jesus. The living water of his words. I have corrected some things I was doing wrong, and I've forgiven all those people who left me to die and stuff. I'm pretty sure I've got most of the dirt washed off, and I feel pretty clean. I think so. And so when you come into her presence and you've really made an effort to clean yourself up, your shirt might not be tucked in or something. You know what I mean? You might have a bit of dirt here on the cheek here that you haven't washed off, a bit you missed. Some small sin you forgot about. But on the whole, you'll be deliberately trying to be clean now. That's the important thing with your spiritual life. Then you can go to heaven. This has been a very long video, and I doubt anyone in the world's ever watched it to the end, or ever will watch it to the end. But it's a very, very important video. This is for all the Jewish Christians, to help them understand the truth of what Jesus was really saying. I'm doing my best to clarify it, to untangle the new wine from the old wine. It's hard to pour the wine out of the old wine, What you have to do is stop drinking the old wine to start with. Rip out the book of Revelations, which is the old wine book of Daniel stuffed into the New Testament Gospels to poison them. Once you rip that out, cut the Bible in two. Once you do that, which I always love to show on YouTube, there are two religions. The Bible, oh yeah, one wineskin, but two different religions, two different gods. Do not put them together in one wineskin called the Bible. Jesus said never do that. The Catholic Church has to cut the Jewish religion off from the Bible. Just leave the Christian New Testament, rip out the book of Revelations, the Revelations book, chapter, because that's the book of Daniel. That belongs in the Jewish religion. Toss it back in with the Jews. Let them have it. Stay with Jesus' dialogue on love and non-violence and you'll get to heaven. Don't be poisoned by the Jewish religion's overlaying onto Jesus and the loving spiritual creator of love that the corrupt Christian leaders back in the 4th century instigated. And the modern Jewish Christian churches haven't got the guts to speak the truth. And that's very disappointing. If a simple gardener like me can see the truth, and I'm happy to talk about it, others do too. Bobby Collier, he's another one to look up on YouTube. He's much more traditional than I am, but he really gets stuck into the satanic war god of the Jews in the Old Testament. He really loves doing it. Good on him. Excellent. You know, a bit of truth, fantastic. But as I say, he's a much more traditional sort of Christian than I am. I'm a bit more of a universal sort of a follower of Jesus. Well, there we are, long video. I doubt anyone will ever watch the full video. It'll be like going to the movies and you have to take popcorn and a meal is that long. But I had to make it this way. I guess you can, you know, if you're watching the video, maybe watch 30 minutes and just write down you've done 30 minutes into the video. Then when you get it on again, just move it along to the 30-minute mark and just pick it up again. That's obviously the way to view this long rambling video. Will I use the word boring? Mum, Dad, Joan, who are in heaven, Sandy, will I say this was a boring video? And they go, no, you're telling the truth. It wasn't boring at all. We're all very happy up here. Or am I just imagining that? Of course, I'm respectful of other people's beliefs that are exactly opposite to mine. And I'm never going to say you're not going to go to heaven. I'll never say that to you. I'll just simply say this is the truth of Jesus' teachings. That's all. And I don't say, anything else than that, really. But of course, the slander, I say that as well. Don't slander him. I'll say that's slander. The book of Revelations is slander. I say that openly. I rip it out of the Bible. I rip it out and burn it. Or stuff it into the book of Daniel if you want to. If you want to keep that rubbish. I say that okay. No problem. I've got a problem with saying that. Because that's the truth. There's no doubt about it. And I can say it for one simple reason. Ever since I was a little child, that big, I've always known Jesus right in the center of my soul and heart. His love and non-violence. He said to Philip, if you see me, Philip, you see God. He is love and non-violence. The divine spiritual creator in the heavenly spiritual world of love, guess what the entire consciousness of that being is? Pure love. Non-violence. Just ask yourself this one question. Is Yahweh pure love and non-violence? I stress the word non-violence. If you answer that logically, intelligently, correctly, you will say, no, Yahweh is not love and non-violence as Jesus was. Therefore, he said to Philip, if you see me, you see God, who is therefore love and non-violence. So therefore, gee, that guy's right. That violent, brutal, murdering, slaughtering, genocidal bastard at Jericho called Yahweh, one, who sent them all down there to do it, that can't be the God of Jesus. That guy's right. This violent, murdering Yahweh, that can't be the God of Jesus because Jesus is love and non-violence. Just put the two beside each other, the black war god of the Jews, and the loving God of the Jews, you know. But you're better off using Jesus' definition of God. That's the perfect definition. Her love is like the sun that rises on the good and on the evil. Her love is like the rain that shines. Her love is like the rain that falls on the just and the unjust. She is kind to the ungrateful and the evil. If you wish to be her children in the heavenly spiritual world, your love must be as perfect as her love. Otherwise you're not her children and you can't get in. Now, does Yahweh shine his love on the good and the enemies of the Jews? Come on, wake up, come on. Have a discussion in your churches about this. Come on, wake up, be truthful, be honest. Have the guts to talk about it. I dare you. I dare you to be truthful. It'll do you good. It'll clean you out of all this Jewish poison that's poisoning the Christian religion for 1700 years. It's time to clean it out, everyone. If you don't know by now that the war god of the Jews is a murderer, while you're watching what the Zionist Jews are doing in the West Bank and Gaza, you'll never know. But you only have to read what they did at Jericho. Go and read it in the book of Joshua. They committed genocide at Jericho, and guess who told them to do it? Yahweh. And if you tell me that's the God of Jesus, you are a Jew, not a Christian. It's that simple. I don't mean to insult anyone. I'm just saying, wake up. Pull your head out of the sand. Have a look at the elephant in the room. Seek the truth and it'll set you free from the Jewish religion war god. That's all. And I can do it because I don't belong to any Jewish Christian organisation. I won't be sacked. If I was a Catholic priest, look, we'll have to sack you. Look, you'll decloth. Throw him out. Throw him out. Don't lock the doors of the church. He's saying Jesus isn't coming on the clouds to kill people and cause sores and sicknesses and famines and starve people to death. We can't have him in the Catholic Church or the Seventh-day Adventist Church or the Jehovah's Witnesses Church or the Pentecostal Church, etc., 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 etc. Rip out the book of Revelation and burn it. As always, love your way to heaven. There's no other way to get in. Or hate your way to hell. The choice is yours. The loving one and Jesus will never hurt you. They never will. We hurt ourselves and we hurt each other, but they will never hurt you. Understand Jesus, who he is, correctly. Don't lie about him and don't slander him anymore. Cut it out. As my mum would say, or you'll get a smack on the bum. If she was here, that's what she'd be doing to you. May we all make our way to heaven through love and non-violence. And that's a very serious thought I want to leave you with. Okay, bye.